Thanks for being here tonight. Quick thing before we start. This channel just crossed 1,000 subscribers, and I'm genuinely grateful to all of you for the support. With that said, let's talk about Kuchisake-onna first, because most people know that story. The Japanese urban legend about the woman with the slit mouth who appears on empty streets, wearing a surgical mask, and asks one question: am I beautiful? Say no, she kills you. Say yes, she pulls down the mask to show a mouth slashed ear to ear and asks again. There's no right answer, no escape, just the terror of a question that was designed to trap you regardless of how you respond. But the Korean red mask woman is different in a way that makes her worse. She doesn't speak, doesn't ask, doesn't need your validation or your fear or any acknowledgement of what she is. She just appears, watches, waits. She never asks if you think she's beautiful. She only waits to see if you notice her at all. And if you do, if you see her clearly, acknowledge her presence even once, then she knows you can see her, and she will never stop watching. What I'm about to share with you is based on police reports, witness testimonies, and psychiatric evaluations from a case closed years ago. The names have been changed, but the events are real. And the question at the heart of this case, whether the red mask woman exists, or whether she's something our minds create to justify the unforgivable, that question remains unanswered. Let's get into it. Dr. Han Min-woo was 38 years old and had built a practice in the Gangnam medical district that occupied the third floor of a glass building wedged between a dermatology clinic, advertising laser treatments on Instagram, and a plastic surgery center whose waiting room looked like a luxury hotel lobby. He'd spent 15 years perfecting smiles, fixing teeth that had been damaged in accidents or worn down by genetics, or simply needed aesthetic improvement because people wanted to feel beautiful when they looked in mirrors, and he was good at his work in the way people are good at things when they've done them so many times that the motions become automatic and the outcomes become predictable. The neighborhood smelled like antiseptic and expensive perfume, money pressed into every square meter of overpriced real estate. And Min-woo had learned to move through that world with the easy confidence of someone who belonged there because he'd made himself belong there through decades of steady hands and patient referrals. It started on a Monday night in early October when he closed his clinic at 10 and headed toward Gangnam station, feeling the faint pressure of being watched settle on the back of his neck like someone had placed a hand there without actually touching him. He turned. The usual evening crowd, commuters, couples heading to dinner, moved past him in both directions. Nothing unusual. He dismissed it. Fatigue, probably. He'd been working late all week, and exhaustion had a way of feeling like paranoia. He descended into the station, swiped his card, boarded the Line 2 train toward Hongdae, settled into the familiar rhythm of his commute. 12 stops, off at Hapjeong, 12-minute walk through residential streets to his office tel building, past the GS25, past the Pojangmacha, with its red tarp and steam rising from tteokbokki pots, past the alley behind the Love Motel where stray cats congregated under the broken streetlight. A route so routine, it had become invisible to him, his body moving through the motions, while his mind drifted toward tomorrow's schedule and the root canal he'd been dreading. Wednesday night, 3 days after that first uneasy feeling, Min-woo sat on the subway heading home. A woman in a red surgical mask sat directly across from him in the mostly empty car. Something about the way she sat made him look twice, then a third time. She wasn't reading her phone, wasn't listening to music. Just sitting with her hands folded, facing forward, head tilted slightly, like she was listening to something beneath the rhythm of the train. Something only she could hear, The mask was vivid red, almost theatrical, not the pale pink or white or blue that most people still wore. When the train pulled into Hapjeong, Min-woo stood to exit. He glanced back. She was watching him, not turning her head to follow, just watching, as if she'd been waiting the entire ride for that single glance, for him to confirm she was there and she had seen him. He told himself it was coincidence that the city held millions of people, and eventually patterns emerged that looked meaningful but were just statistical inevitability. But that night, he dreamed of a woman in a red mask standing at the foot of his bed in the dark, not moving or speaking, just standing there with that same deliberate stillness. And he woke gasping at 4 a.m. with his heart hammering in his throat, convinced for one terrible moment before he turned on the lamp that he could see a figure silhouetted in his bedroom doorway. When the light clicked on, the room was empty, just his futon, his bookshelf, his desk cluttered with dental journals he'd been meaning to read. But he didn't fall back asleep, just lay there staring at the ceiling, constructing explanations that felt increasingly hollow the longer he tried to believe them. By the second week, she was appearing with regularity that went beyond coincidence. On his subway car Friday evening, Monday morning, Wednesday night, always in the same position relative to him, never right next to him, but always close enough that he could see her clearly in his peripheral vision, always wearing that red mask that stood out like a wound against the grey interior of the train. Min-woo started varying his commute times, leaving work at different hours, taking different routes home, but she appeared anyway, sometimes on the platform waiting when he arrived, sometimes already seated on the train he boarded, and he couldn't escape the growing certainty that she was following him specifically, that this wasn't random proximity, but targeted observation. The first time Dr. Kang Soo-jin noticed something wrong was on a Thursday afternoon when Min-woo was performing a composite bonding procedure on a college student, and his hands started shaking badly enough that the patient asked if maybe he needed to take a break, if maybe something was wrong. Soo-jin had worked with Min-woo for 7 years. She'd watched him perform countless procedures with steady hands. She'd never seen them shake like this. When she caught his eye across the treatment chair, his expression held something she couldn't name, but she recognized it immediately: fear. After the patient left, she asked him directly if he was okay, if he needed to go home early, if there was something happening she should know about, and he deflected with practiced ease, said he was just tired, just needed better sleep, just dealing with normal work stress that would pass. She let it go because pushing would have meant acknowledging that something fundamental had shifted in her colleague and friend, and neither of them was ready for that acknowledgement yet. Detective Choi Jin-ho was standing in the recovery room of Seoul National University Hospital on a Thursday morning in late November, staring at the 7th victim and feeling his stomach twist in a way that had stopped being about individual cases and had become about pattern recognition, about understanding that he was looking at the work of someone methodical and precise. Kim Ji-hae was 29, graphic designer, lived alone in Mapo, and she was sedated so heavily that her breathing came in shallow mechanical rhythms, while her mouth stayed wrapped in gauze that had bled through in irregular patches. The chart said, unconscious when attacked, sedated with propofol administered intravenously, dental work performed by someone with professional knowledge of oral anatomy, 3 molars extracted, 2 fillings removed, drilling that fractured a root and required reconstructive surgery. Her roommate had found her at 6 a.m. on the living room floor, blood pooled beneath her head, and Choi had spent the past 6 weeks watching this same scenario repeat across 7 victims without understanding why or how, until the pattern finally emerged in a way he couldn't ignore. All 7 attacks happened at night, in the victims' own homes. The attacker used propofol to sedate them, then performed procedures that showed real dental expertise but had no medical purpose whatsoever. And here's what got under my skin. In the hours before each attack, the victims had seen her, a woman in a red surgical mask, just standing there, on sidewalks, subway platforms, outside convenience stores, watching, never coming closer, never saying a word. At the time, they'd felt something was off but couldn't say why. It was only after the attacks that they remembered her, and that vague wrongness crystallized into something they could name. The 7th victim had added one detail that lodged in Choi's mind like a splinter. I thought she was watching something else, something that wasn't me. I couldn't tell what or where, just that her attention wasn't on me anymore. Minwoo's life was fracturing in ways he couldn't articulate to anyone, least of all himself. How do you explain that you're being followed by someone with no pattern? She appeared and disappeared at will. She showed up in places she shouldn't be able to reach. Her presence had become so constant that he'd started seeing her even when she wasn't there, in reflections that resolved into something else when he looked directly, in crowds where the red mask flashed for half a second before being swallowed by normal faces moving through normal lives. She was outside his clinic during the middle of the afternoon, standing across the street in the October rain, motionless while everyone else hurried past with umbrellas and briefcases. She was in his building hallway late one night, standing outside his door facing away from him. And when he called security and the guard arrived 3 minutes later, the hallway was empty. The CCTV footage showed nothing, and the expression on the guard's face shifted from concern to wary confusion. The look you give someone when you start wondering if they're having a mental health crisis. That night, alone in his apartment with his laptop glowing in the dark, Minwoo searched desperately for any mention of a woman in a red surgical mask stalking people in Seoul, in Korea, anywhere, but nothing matched what was happening to him. Because the woman following him never spoke, never approached, never asked him anything, just appeared again and again in places she shouldn't be. And the more he searched, the more certain he became that she was real, that she wanted something from him he couldn't name, that this was building towards something he wouldn't be able to stop. On a Friday morning just before dawn, Soo-jin arrived at the clinic an hour early to prep for a root canal and found Min-woo standing at the counter in the procedure room with his back to her, dental tools laid out in precise rows on the stainless steel tray. Scalers, explorers, extraction forceps, high-speed handpieces, syringes, all of it arranged with the kind of careful attention that suggested ritual rather than preparation. And his white coat was stained with blood down the front and across both sleeves. And when she said his name, he turned slowly with an expression of complete incomprehension, as if he'd never seen these tools before in his life, as if he had no idea how he'd gotten here or what he'd been doing. "I don't know how I got here," he said, in a voice that sounded mechanical, emptied of affect. "I was at home, I was sleeping, and then I was here." Soo-jin wanted to call the police, wanted to call an ambulance, wanted to run, but Min-woo reached out and grabbed her wrist, not violently, not even hard, just desperately, and begged her in a voice that cracked in the middle not to tell anyone. Please, he was just overworked. He'd been sleepwalking. It wouldn't happen again. And because loyalty is a terrible, powerful thing, because they'd worked together for 7 years and shared coffee and complaints about difficult patients, because she couldn't quite bring herself to believe that the person she knew was capable of. Whatever the blood on his coat suggested, she agreed, helped him clean up, made him promise to see a doctor, and for 3 more days said nothing to anyone, even though the fear sat in her chest like a stone she couldn't swallow. Detective Choi decided to visit Min-woo's clinic on a Wednesday afternoon, after narrowing his suspect list to 6 dentists who fit the geographic and professional profile. And when Soo-jin answered the door, she was nervous in a way that went beyond ordinary civilian discomfort around police, her hands fidgeting with the hem of her lab coat, her eyes darting past him toward the hallway, as if expecting someone else to appear. Choi kept his voice gentle, explained he was investigating assaults and needed to ask routine questions, and Soo-jin's composure cracked like glass. She started crying without sound, just tears streaking her face, and told him everything in a rush of words that tumbled over each other about the blood and the tools, and Min-woo's insistence that a woman in a red mask was following him, watching him, appearing in places she shouldn't be. They found Min-woo sitting cross-legged on the floor of his apartment in Hongdae, catatonic, dried blood on his hands, and every surface of his walls covered with photographs, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, pinned and taped and layered in chaotic collage from floor to ceiling, all showing the same woman in a red surgical mask. Some were grainy printed stills from CCTV footage, timestamps visible in the corners. Others Min-woo had clearly taken himself, shot from angles that suggested he'd been following her through the city with the same obsessive attention she'd been giving him. Each photo was labeled in cramped handwriting. Gangnam Station Platform 1923, Outside Clinic 1447, Hapjeong Alley 215. As officers lifted Min-woo to his feet and guided him toward the door, he finally spoke in a voice barely above whisper. She showed me what I did 15 years ago, showed me their mouths, all the smiles I fixed. They were all wrong, all covering something. I had to fix them, had to see what was underneath. After Min-woo was taken to the station, Choi stood alone in that apartment covered with images of the red mask woman. The unease settled over him then, cold and physical. He kept coming back to the photographs. Many showed her standing in dead angles behind structural pillars, in blind spots between camera coverage zones, places where CCTV shouldn't capture anything. But the images were there anyway, clear, sharp, undeniable. The trial moved quickly. The physical evidence was overwhelming. His DNA at crime scenes, propofol in his apartment, dental tools that matched wound patterns, financial records showing cash withdrawals that coincided with attacks. Min-woo maintained throughout that the red mask woman had selected victims, that she'd led him to them, that he had no memory of the attacks themselves, just fragmented images of her watching him work, and the overwhelming compulsion to fix mouths that looked wrong to him in ways he couldn't articulate. Psychiatrists diagnosed dissociative identity disorder complicated by psychotic episodes. The prosecution argued he'd constructed an elaborate delusion triggered by unprocessed guilt from a botched procedure 15 years earlier. A young woman whose cosmetic work had resulted in permanent nerve damage, who'd committed suicide 6 months after the failed surgery. A woman whose name Min-woo couldn't even remember because she'd been one of hundreds of patients in those early chaotic years of his practice. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. 15 years in a secure psychiatric facility. Min-woo showed no reaction, just sat in the defendant's chair, staring at something in the middle distance that no one else could see. 2 months after the trial, Choi sat alone in the interrogation room, holding one of the photographs entered as evidence. The red masked woman standing on a street corner near Hapjeong Station, facing the camera directly. The mask, vivid and unmistakable against grey evening light. He pulled out his phone, navigated to the archived CCTV footage from that exact timestamp, played the video and watched the street corner at the precise moment the photograph had supposedly been taken. The footage showed an empty street. No woman, no red mask, just streetlights reflecting off wet pavement and the occasional passing car, and a businessman hurrying home with his umbrella. He paused the video, stared at the photograph in his hand. She was there, standing exactly where the CCTV footage showed nothing but empty sidewalk. 7 victims were recovering, though some would never regain full sensation, and one would need dentures before 40. Minwoo was in psychiatric custody, spending his days in a fog of antipsychotics, and his nights cycling through the same insistence that she had been real, that she had shown him something true about guilt and damage, and the smiles people use to hide their wounds. Justice, in the legal sense, had been served. The case was closed. The files were archived. But the question remained hanging in the air like smoke that wouldn't dissipate. Was the red mask woman real? A stalker or predator or partner in Minwoo's crimes who'd escaped detection? Or was she a manifestation of guilt so powerful it warped perception itself? So vivid it could be photographed by a mind desperate to externalize its own horror? Choi would never know the answer. And perhaps that was the real horror at the center of this story, that sometimes the truth is less terrifying than the uncertainty, that the question of what's real and what's imagined can haunt you longer and deeper than any concrete answer ever could. That cameras can lie or tell truths. We're not equipped to see or capture things that exist in spaces between what surveillance technology records and what human perception confirms. If you ever feel watched on your commute home, if you see someone in a red mask 3 nights in a row, standing in the same spot watching you with that deliberate stillness, don't investigate. Don't try to understand. Don't look for answers you might not be able to live with. Just take the long way, change your route, break your routine, because some things are better left unnoticed and some questions are better left unasked. She never asks if you think she's beautiful. She only waits to see if you notice her at all. And if you do, she knows you see her, and she will never look away.